Hello everyone and welcome to DevGAMM Online 2021 in November. My name is Artyom Volkov and I've been developing games almost for 11 years. I specialize in system and technical game design. Besides, I've tutored beginner game designers for 3 years. Actually, I'm so glad to be here because it's my very first speech in English and I hope that you will like it and find something useful. Today, I'm going to talk about game design scenes. What are they? How they affect our work and development process, why it's essential to learn about them, and how to cope with them. What are these scenes, you ask me? And let me introduce you 7 game design scenes: sloppiness, ignorance, hubris, rigidity, future creep, blind imitation, and overcomplication. Fortunately, they are not deadly, at least for cats. To be precise, they are not scenes at all. In fact, they are common mistakes I faced while checking homework and diploma project of my students. After helping 20 groups of people to graduate as junior game designers and reflecting on my own experience, I realized that young game developers tend to make a compilation of common mistakes at the beginning of their careers. Frankly, it's quite exhausting to explain to new pupils and beginners the same topic ever and ever again. So it was my main reason to prepare this speech. There are no game designers who have never made such mistakes. Consequently, all experienced developers have faced these scenes during their careers. Moreover, these scenes are applicable to game development in general. And to put it bluntly, we are all sinners. It's time to repent our sins. These scenes have many adverse effects, which are the main reason to study them, especially how to cope with them. The most obvious and unpleasant impact is slow career development. Of course, it doesn't mean that the knowledge of these scenes will dramatically accelerate your progress or guarantee rapid professional advancement. However, the awareness will help you to face less issues on your career path at the very beginning. These scenes also negatively affect teamwork. Game development is about the team. Behind many high-profile AAA and indie games are people who work together to deliver excellent results. One of common reasons of project failure or developer hell is an inability to work in a close team, which also entails slow professional growth. Some of these scenes influence communication skills. Not only does it affect teamwork, but it also affects networking. Experience exchange is a vital part of game development, and many people are eager to share their experiences and ready to give in-depth feedback. It's a pity to lose such a good source of knowledge. And the last but not least victim is the result of our work. I dare say that many decent game design ideas and games died because of these things, and many more come out worse than they could have been. Undoubtedly, it's the main reason to learn how to cope with them. And let's start from sloppiness. Most beginners and junior game designers don't understand the fundamental rule of game design documentation. You write it not for yourself, but your team. This is the main cause of sloppiness. Developing games is about working with a huge volume of diverse information, which come from different sources. The worse this information is delivered to a developer, the higher probability of miscommunication and misunderstanding is. Sloppy game designers tend to ignore working on game design documentation structure. Chaotic structure dramatically increases the searching time of particular documents, as they can be hidden in a very unexpected part of your Confluence or Wiki. The bigger your game is, the more documentation it has, the more time it takes to orient around it. Moreover, they spend more time reading game documentation than writing it. Thus, if your documents have sloppy formatting and deplorable structure, it's highly likely that a specialist will struggle to understand what you have written. Eventually, you'll spend more time fixing such documentation. Lastly, beginner game designers have a false notion that a good game design document has many pages. Thereby, texts become overly verbose and clear as mud. Usually, such documents are bloated and they are hard to understand. However, some beginners tend to write less because they think that everything is obvious. Such documentation has overly short text and lacks details. In this case, you can expect everything because the less detailed a description is, the higher probability that a developer misunderstands you. Eventually, they will do whatever they want. In my opinion, sloppiness is the easiest thing to cope with. But it doesn't mean that you can ignore or put it aside. As game designers, we must convey our ideas as efficiently as we can and ensure that the probability of being misunderstood is minuscule. The only way to achieve it is accurate project documentation. I highly recommend writing your own game design documentation guidelines, in which you describe how you should write game design documents for your project. It must cover such topics as necessary sections, text formatting, requirements for references, flowcharts, code blocks, etc. Wikis of high-profile games are an excellent example of decent game documentation in terms of structure and text formatting. Additionally, don't ignore your teammates. Ask them what you can improve in your documents to make them better. As I said before, you write documentation not for yourself, but your team. You can't deliver an excellent result without feedback from your teammates. I dare say that it's better to suffer from verbosity than from insufficient description. The reason is that it's easier and faster to shorten your text, getting rid of unnecessary words, than to write additional details. Nonetheless, it doesn't mean that you can turn a blind eye on it. Also, you can use clean game design documentation principles, about which I delivered a speech at DevGAMM Online last fall. Ignorance is a lack of knowledge of game development in general and its various aspects. Usually, beginner game designers have a delusion that creating games is a trivial task and doesn't require any effort, especially considering programming and testing. In the worst cases, it can lead to toxic behavior towards teammates and their work results. For instance, I don't see any trouble to test the whole game again. I don't see any difficulty to implement open world with absolute destruction for 1,000 players in a month, etc. It's easy to imagine what kind of consequences such a person can face in the future. Sometimes beginners have a false notion that a game designer has only one responsibility, idea generation. Because of that, they refuse to acquire new hard skills. Not only are such game designers a burden for a whole team, but they are also a common source of miscommunication and misunderstandings, as they can't convey their ideas to their team and clearly explain what results they expect from a task performer. Luckily, ignorance is a relatively easy thing to cope with. The first step is obviously self-education. Studying new hard and soft skills is vital for game designers. The smaller the team is, the more duties each teammate fulfill. That's why it's essential to be more than just a game designer who writes documentation. In small teams, you'll definitely work on different parts of a project. Besides, the more you know about different aspects of game development, the better communication with the team is. As game designers, we always communicate with various specialists like QA, programmers, level designers, animators, sound designers, and many others. Fortunately, nowadays it's quite trivial to be self-educated thanks to a great deal of diverse educational online platforms. Of course, you shouldn't learn everything and become expert in everything, but a broad experience always is a good thing for us. The second step is communication with industry colleagues. You always can learn something new from them. Besides, such communication will definitely help you to understand how different people work and what pipelines they use in their projects, which can be very beneficial in the future. You can also get some quality feedback and help from them. At last, the most efficient way to overcome ignorance is solo development. Several small comprehensive game prototypes made during short game jams turn your world upside down because it's an actual practice, which is usually the most effective way to get one's head out of the clouds. Because outside of the actual development process, everything looks pretty effortless to do until you try to do it yourself. Actually, ignorance is a wolf in sheep's clothing. It seems harmful and easy to cope with. Nonetheless, it can lead to hubris, the most abhorrent and treacherous sin. I consider hubris as a result of the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's a type of cognitive bias in which people believe that they are smarter and more capable than they really are. Essentially, low ability people don't possess the skills needed to recognize their own incompetence. Indeed, the lack of knowledge is a usual cause. However, in the case of the game industry, excessive positive feedback from colleagues contribute to this sin a lot. They are used to supporting each other because they know that game development is a tremendous challenge. Still, they forget about details. Not because of ill will, but because we don't have time or we are afraid of hurting one's feelings. Eventually, we are used to sharing a lot of undetailed positive feedback. As a result, some game developers delude themselves that everything is fine, but it's not. Thereby, such people are unwilling to hear out most suggestions and opinions, especially those that advise some changes. In some cases, they can be extremely toxic. Sometimes it looks ironic because they have asked you for your feedback on their game. Coping with ignorance is the first step to overcoming hubris. Yet, you can't kill these two birds with one stone, as hubris is broader than I have described. Its nature differs from person to person. It can be caused by character sometimes, and getting rid of it may require the help of professional psychologists or psychotherapists. Back to the topic, I highly recommend you to study how to give and receive feedback. It's not trivial, but working with criticism is a huge part of game development. In addition, not only is it beneficial in terms of external communications, but it also comes in handy for internal communications because developers often change their opinions about their work results. Unfortunately, insufficient positive feedback is as toxic as inadequate negative one. It doesn't matter positive or negative criticism you get. The thought details it as useful as white elephant. In short, wow, you did a great job, is similar to your game is shit, I hate it. Spending time on such feedback is flogging a dead horse. The best way to start coping with it is by asking for details. As a game designer, you must know in depth what players like and hate in your game, what mechanics they consider good and which one bad. Of course, it's not pleasing to get negative criticism. Still, it can make all the difference to your game, as sometimes people can point out a flaw in your game design. Finally, don't be fooled by the many praises of industry colleagues. Take their feedback with a grain of salt. I don't mean that you shouldn't trust your fellow colleagues. Just be down to earth and, as I said before, ask for details. A good game designer is a flexible game designer. A bad one is rigid. Rigidity can be caused by both ignorance and hubris, yet it requires additional efforts to overcome. I dare say that rigid game designers face the law of the instrument, Maslow's hammer. In short, it's a cognitive bias that involves an over-reliance on a familiar tool. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Indeed, rigid game developers can be extremely stubborn when it comes to choosing a toolset for development. Sometimes people refuse to change anything and are ready to suffer from obnoxious pipelines because they know this tool well. Eventually, they probably work less efficiently because they spent a considerable amount of time overcoming some limits or fixing some features of their engine of choice. However, the notion of Maslow's hammer is broader in the case of game development. It also includes fixation on a particular game design philosophy or game idea, which beginner game developers tend to cherish religiously. Thereby, rigid game designers are pretty inefficient problem solvers due to their narrow-minded approaches. They can't see issues from different perspectives. Fortunately, acquiring hard skills is an excellent way to get rid of both ignorance and rigidity. The more tools you know and use, the more ways of achieving your goals you have. Not to mention that you can extrapolate your experience between similar tools. But in terms of game design, you must make additional efforts to become flexible. First and foremost, try to prepare at least two different solutions for your mechanics. Don't be hasty. Take your time to ponder them. Still, everything is good in moderation. Don't generate solutions because you can. Remember about deadlines. Secondly, don't hesitate to ask your teammates for their opinions and ideas. It's quite usual when someone from the team suggests a fascinating idea, which you can use to improve your design, especially when you have got blurry eyes and can't make head nor tail of how to approach a task in hand. Also, the look from a different perspective can inspire your imagination. Finally, develop a lot of small prototypes which revolve around one game system. It can help you to find different ways of solving one problem. Future creep is the excessive ongoing expansion of new features and product in a product. In our case, in game, I also call the scene mechanics in the sake of mechanics. Beginner game developers, especially game designers, often think that a good game must have a lot of different game mechanics. Several progression system, craft, itemization, item quality, abilities, procedural generation, etc. And all these mechanics in one game, even if it's a small one. In some cases, Game designers want to add systems in every corner of their game. Usually, such a notion is caused by ignorance, and big high-profile AAA titles as beginners use them as an example of how to make a good game. As a result, their project gets more and more different systems because it's fun, and developers strive to create a game from their dreams. Ultimately, instead of having a smooth and fun game loop, they got a large collection of different game mechanics that don't work together at all. To cope with future creep, I strongly advise using the KISS game design principle. KISS means keep it stupid simple. In short, you should keep your game loop as simple as possible and add new mechanics. Only then you can explain why you need them in detail. Notably, you can't just say because it's fun, as the definition of fun is extensive and differs from person to person. A good game designer must clarify what kind of fun this mechanics brings to a player. Of course, we have more reasons to implement game systems, but the fun is the most ambiguous and vague, which can easily cause future creep. Besides, another question you should answer while working on game mechanics is how does it match the core pillars of the game? Core pillars or design pillars are foundational principles of your game design philosophy on a project. If a system doesn't match it, you should either cut or completely rework. Blind imitation is a special case of future creep. It also can be called inspired future creep. As I said before, beginner developers like to use big AAA games as an example. It's pretty often when they start adopting game systems from their reference games without any proper research. Although there is a chance of a positive outcome, the risks are high, or the risks are high. Eventually, you're likely to break your game loop, and the adopted system won't work because of the dramatic difference between design pillars and the core game loop of both games. Cloning games can suffer from blind imitation without proper market research because you can face survivorship bias. Beginner developers can be easily inspired by a trendy AAA or indie game and try to repeat its success without considering that their success is due to pure luck and unexpected market conjecture. The worst case of blind imitation is when game designers mix up systems from absolutely contrasting games in terms of gameplay, audience, pacing, genre, gameplay loop, uh, and core pillars, of course. I don't mean that mixing different genres is a bad idea. However, it is an extremely challenging game design task with which even experienced developers have a lot of troubles. Fortunately, everything I have said about future creep also work with blind imitation, yet it's not enough to cope with it. The first action you should always take when adopting some mechanics from other games is conducting a comprehensive research. Not only must you play these games and deconstruct them, but you also should research their communities and look for in-depth analysis of their systems and mechanics. Fortunately, there are a decent amount of content creators who make superb videos about various popular indie and AAA games, to the degree that you can learn from them a lot about the game design and level design. Secondly, carefully assess the adopted solution to manage your design pillars and not break the game loop. Next, compare the core pillars of your game with your references. If they contrast or have little in common, it's highly recommended to consider changing your reference games. Lastly, to avoid survivorship bias, conduct market research. It's common that beginners don't see how many games miserably fail because someone's success blinded them. But it may turn out that the success is pure luck, and there are many similar games that have died. Overcomplication resembles feature creep and blind imitation. However, the striking difference is that it's about particular approaches in designing game mechanics. In my experience, junior game designers have a strong notion that complicated mechanics and systems are fun. Thereby, they design overly convoluted systems with many details and rules which are really challenging to understand. Such an approach dramatically deteriorates user experience and overall impression. Moreover, the more complicated a solution is, the harder a game is to balance. The second cause of overcomplication is a strive to create as flexible systems as possible. They are pretty immense, both in terms of game design, program architecture, and user experience. Thus, the team will definitely face many troubles implementing them. Most importantly, the majority of games don't need such system at all. Besides, beginners don't think about how a player will interact with this system and learn about it in game. As a result, the UX aspect of such overly convoluted solutions is half-baked and hard to use. The last reason is imaginary problems. They are the problems that a team hasn't faced, and nobody's sure it will be a case in the future. Most importantly, such problems have a snowball effect. The more you try to solve, the more you imagine. In the end, your solution will rapidly blow out just because you try to solve an issue which don't have a cat in house chance of happening or happened once in a blue moon. To eliminate overcomplication it's vital to realize that simple game mechanics aren't bad at all. Remember that the more convoluted your solution is, the more time you will spend on implementation. And we know that time is money. I strongly recommend always starting from a simple solution and stick with iterative design approach. Then you change your system little by little, taking in consideration only those issues which you encounter right now or in immediate future. Besides, the keys principle, which I have mentioned before, also is useful in case of overcomplication. Additionally, you should think about what problems you want to solve, then you want to add some changes in your solution. In addition, I always ask you always I'm sorry. In addition, always ask yourself if you really need the complex, flexible system which with plenty of parameters to adjust. Indeed, such mechanics seems to be interesting to work with, but they are also hard to support. Remember, the more flexible your solution is, the higher the probability of bugs and error is. The imaginary problems are tricky because it's difficult to recognize if it's imaginary or not. I recommend to answer three simple questions. Does this issue affect your current work? Will it affect the project in the near future? Have you or your colleagues faced something similar before? If all three answer no, this problem is probably imaginary. Finally, do not forget about user experience. Think how you will teach a player this system and how players will interact with it. The more convoluted mechanics are, the easier it is to spoil its UX. Even if players like this system in terms of game design, a deplorable UX, like a rotten apple, it spoils the whole barrel. And here is some general advice. It's okay to make mistakes at the beginning. Experience is simply the name we give our mistakes, Oscar Wilde. These sins are unavoidable and a crucial part of our careers as game developers. Don't be afraid to make such mistakes. As I said at the very beginning, there is no game designer who has never experienced these sins. Forewarned is forearmed. Experience enables you to recognize a mistake when you make it again. Franklin P. Jones. Knowledge of these sins should help beginner developers and junior game designers cope with negative effects faster and more efficiently because it's less painful to correct your errors at the very beginning of your career path. An ideal game is an attainable dream. Of course, every game designer is eager to develop an ideal game, yet it's an unattainable dream, at least until you can get an infinite budget. But the truth is that that game developers should strive to deliver a decent product, which might be imperfect, but fun to play and gamers enjoy it. Practice makes perfect. Knowledge is of no value unless you put it into practice. Anton Chekhov. The fact you have listened to my speech and get a grasp of these scenes doesn't make any difference to you until you start working on yourself. Everything I've told today requires practicing, and this knowledge can put your efforts to good use. Develop your future cut skills. Future cut is one of the most essential skills for game developers. It will definitely come in handy with future creep, blind imitation, and overcomplication, as it will help to simplify your gameplay and systems. Besides, it's an unusual thing to cut some features because of deadlines. Nonetheless, it's relatively simple to spoil your game loop and UX if you have a mediocre feature cut skill. Don't be afraid of simple projects. Simple games aren't bad. Moreover, for beginners and junior game designers, several tiny projects can make all the difference to the knowledge of game development because they don't take much time to be made, and you can make the majority of common mistakes in a very brief period of time. In contrast, most of the beginners who started developing a big game straight away failed miserably, and also they learned about common mistakes much later than they could have. Don't hesitate to ask for help and feedback. If you come to a dead end or you are not sure about your game design approach, don't be afraid of asking for some help and feedback. As I've said today, there are a great deal of people in the industry who is ready to give a hand and exchange their knowledge with others. However, most of the time it's your responsibility to contact them. Remember, experts are busy. Even if they are eager to mentor, they don't have time to look for those who want to be mentored. But they like beginners who can take the ball by their horns and approach them. Play and deconstruct a lot of games. Captain Obvious to the rescue. Everything was in Simpsons, as well as all game mechanics was implemented in different games. Broad gaming experience allow you to find proper reference much faster. In addition, it's a good way to look for interesting design ideas, UX solutions, and inspiration. Thank you to attending my speech. I hope it will come in useful and you have learned something new. Now I'm ready to answer your questions.
Artyom, Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. By far the best one I've seen at DevGAMM. So many cats. We in chat, we tried to count all of the cats. Someone counted 30, but I believe it was about 50 or so. Well, sinners, this is going to be iconic, I believe. At the end of the year, we at DevGAMM do this video with the highlights of the year, and I think you will be a star in this one. That's for sure. So we have a lot of questions for you. Let me start with this one, which was upvoted for many people. So I think many people want to know, where can one find a solid example of design document or its structure, if you know a perfect example?
Oh, sorry. It's hard to say as yeah, well, here is my perfect cat. As I said during the lecture, the closest example are wikis of high-profile games. Also, I can share my own guideline for documentation, which I use during my current game design work. However, it's in Russian.
Yeah, actually, and the question was in Russian as well, so I think
I say that it's a pity that it's really hard to find some interesting examples of game design documents around the internet because of NDA, and it's really challenging to teach people how to write an excellent documentation. However, there are also yet another problem. Everyone work as they pleased, as every team has their own rules how to write documentation. Some teams, for example, stick with I'm sorry. User flow, or for example, use case approach of game design documentation is pretty different from mine.
Yes, thank you so much. Another one, and I actually had the same question. What scenes persecuted you personally? How did you deal with them? Or perhaps which one do you hate the most out of all scenes?
I hate the most Hubris. Fortunately, I haven't been affected by Hubris. But others, of course, I'm a sinner. I experience all others because I was young and I started my career about 10 years ago after big Russian game dev apocalypse. It was a barren land when we didn't have any schools and courses to help us. And how I cope with them, to be honest, I just learn, and learn.
Yeah, learning is everything. It's a painful process. Okay, thank you. Another one, I'm trying to translate it on the spot. So can you say that that when beginners aspire to some complicated, non-standard, overloaded systems, so this aspiration is caused by high competence, by high not the competence, but the highest quantity of people.
Okay, I found this question.
And desire to stand out in front of others.
Yes, it's true. Sometimes beginners really want to make something unexpected, something new, to the degree that their game doesn't work at all. And most of the time it costs, most of the time it costs by their low experience in gaming. They don't play much games, and eventually they think the system or idea is absolutely new, but most of the time it's not.
Okay, thank you. We have time for a few more questions. Do you think hyper-casual games are good for beginners?
Yes, absolutely. Hyper casual games are excellent way to start their career. First of all, they're easy to develop in terms of time. However, in terms of game design, they can be very challenging because you have to make a very good mechanic. One, but very, very good.
Okay. Next one is from Sabina, actually, a good one. How good do you think it is to start your way to game dev in an indie studio? Or rather, would you suggest starting in a company?
Oh, so I think it's a very tricky question. From one point of view, it doesn't matter where you start, indie game or a big company, but I can say that sometimes it's vital to any game designer to have some experience working in a huge corporation to understand how it really works, and because you can meet a lot of different people who can help you to become an excellent game designer.
Right. Yeah, great suggestion. What do you think is the best way to measure players' experience to make your design better? Best way to measure players' experience?
To be honest, I'm not sure what does it mean to measure players' experience. It means your experience as a game designer, or
no, it's probably
experience
about
of your actual players.
yeah, probably the second one, of players' experience, those people who play your game.
To be honest, I can't ask this. I can't answer this question properly, I think, because it's pretty. I can say that if you want to make your game design better and you want to orient on your players, just do play tests and hire companies who can provide you with such play tests, because most of the time such companies can find you people who are the best for your game in terms of play testing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
all right.
there are a lot of ways to measure players' experience for your game. It's
Sure.
all, or I can say that it's all about working with your core audience. Then you understand your core audience and your core pillars. You can describe who your ideal player is.
Okay. And next question is actually connected to the previous one. Have you ever met games that are made frankly poorly in visualization, or there is no idea or goal, but most players give good reviews?
Oh, I can say hello Minecraft back to 10 years ago. Now you describe just games like Minecraft with open world and absolute freedom. Do whatever you want. And back to the days, Minecraft didn't have an excellent picture. It was just indie game with voxels, which looked pretty strange for the majority of people, but now it's a good game.
Yeah, somehow they coped to make it better.
Yes.
Actually, people in chat are asking a lot about the link to the design documents you mentioned. So could you share afterwards, after your presentation,
yes,
in the
of course.
chat? Yeah, everyone would be really happy. And probably the last question, or at least one of the last ones, still, because I do have. Okay, so Pavel is having a follow-up question to the previous one. How do you personally relate to these games which have no idea? Well, at least at first.
I don't understand what does it mean which don't have any idea, because every game has some ideas in mind, and game designer tries to, or game developer tries to develop their game. They always have an idea of what they want to do. If you mean about goals, it's okay if it's some kind of Minecraft.
Yeah. Okay, probably the last question from Evgeny, who is sharing his personal story, I believe. So if the very first game I've started after a couple of weeks looks for me already awful, then should I start a new one or finish that awful one just for end-to-end experience?
The second option is the best. Don't
Okay.
get rid of your games if you see it's bad, but and it doesn't work well, but you see that you don't spend much time to finish it. It's better to finish it. However, it's better to work through prototypes. Create small prototypes, and if you see that the idea doesn't work well right now and it requires much more time to implement, it's better to put it away and start something new over.
Sabina is saying, I do believe many game designers do hate Minecraft for the way how it was made.
I don't know. To be honest, I don't that it's a case at all, because there are a lot of games around us, and you don't have time and energy to hate so much games.
So after all, do you think that if all game designers are sinners, they all go to some special game designers hell or so?
No, they go to special game designers heaven.
Okay. So I'll meet you there next time, hopefully. Thank you, Artyom. Thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. Again, so many cats, so many great questions. Everyone in chat just loves your talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.